Hello again. Welcome to another episode of Azania In Therapy. I'm your host, Tlaka. Today, I'm with a special guest, a colleague, someone with a warm spirit, all the way in Ireland. Please welcome Maxine Manley. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. That's so sweet.
Yeah, no, don't you know that about yourself?
Well, we know it, but we don't always believe it.
Yeah, no, you have this lovely energy, and I'm glad that you've given me the time out of your busy schedule, and then your new adventures to talk to me. So thank you very much. And
My
maybe
pleasure.
let's
Thank you
start
for
there. So you in Ireland?
yes, yeah. Well, thank you for inviting me. Yes. So I am a counselling psychologist. I studied fully in South Africa, and then I moved over here, um, 2 years ago, actually. Yeah,
So it's 2 years now.
yeah. It's been 2 years. It's crazy,
And and
actually.
how and how was the transition? So when you moved there, did you have to write anything? How did you the studying here, and did you get recognized? How did that all happen?
So that's a very interesting situation. So psychologists, as a practitioner or as a profession, are not regulated in Ireland. Um, I'll share a link with you. Actually, it was in the news in March this year how unregulated psychologists are in Ireland. So in South Africa, we have the HPCSA. In Ireland, they have the government is called the HSE, so the Health Service Executive. And then there's an HPCSA equivalent called CORU. But CORU doesn't regulate psychologists and a list of other professionals. So in actual fact, it's quite informal, which is a scary thing. There is a
Yeah.
psychological there's a psychological society of Ireland that attempts to regulate psychologists and psychotherapists. So while I was in South Africa, I registered with them, and they accepted me based on purely my undergraduate degree. So I have been practicing for the last 2 years based on just my honors degree, and I've only just recently submitted all my master's documentation to have my master's degree validated. Because I would like to work for the government. So in order to work for the government or work for a more professional institution, like a multidisciplinary team at a clinic or a hospice, you need to be one level up. So the Psychological Society has multiple levels. I'm a graduate level. I want to be a chartered level. In order to be that, I need my master's degree validated. But it's a long application. It was about 150 pages, because you have to list every assignment you have ever done in psychology from day one all the way to the end. And our master's degree is equivalent to their doctorate. So it's a lot that they ask for. So
But
hopefully I'm holding next week. I will be officially a chartered psychologist in Ireland. So I'm holding
wow,
hands.
but where do you get all that information? I mean, do you remember all those assignments? Like, what did you have to do to? I mean, what did you
Thankfully,
have to do?
I'm a bit of a hoarder. So in terms of, I have everything backed up. So I knew the title of my assignments. I still had them online. I only listed my typed assignments because obviously the written ones, they're probably destroyed. It's been that long ago. So I gave as much as I could. And then another interesting thing is, despite it being unregulated, there is an expectation that you have 1 hour of supervision for every 10 clients you see, or 10 hours sessions. It's an expectation, it's not regulated. So when I had to submit my documentation, I had to submit proof of supervision. But in South Africa, as soon as you're a private practitioner, no one really
Hey,
checks if you're
yes, you
supervised or
just
not.
enjoy.
Yeah. So thankfully, I had personally always kept up with supervision. So I'd always chatted with friends or with colleagues. And then whenever I had a clinical case, I met up with a clinical psychologist at the University of Pretoria. So thank goodness for that, because
Yeah,
then I
that
could
that
prove,
helped.
yeah. But I did explain that the HPCSA doesn't require supervision; they trust us. But I think it's because in Ireland you only need a 4-year degree, and then you have to document your own 450 hours supervised, a 10-to-1. So that's why they expect that, because you can then go and do your own supervised work on your own. It's not in a master's program like we would have done.
Wow, that's so interesting. And then, so you then working, So how has that been? Where do you get clients, and does it feel familiar? Does it feel like it's a totally different thing?
So, yeah, it's interesting. It's familiar in the sense that you run your own private practice. I rent rooms from two places, and I run privately on my own. So I just rent from them an hourly rate, or I take a block, or I have a couple blocks, and then they get clients. So they have a website and they do what's called a best fit. So they have like a mini consultation with the client, and they see, they've got a list of 30 therapists that rent rooms from them, and then they see who fits best. So that's familiar in a sense. I'm privately on my own. I do my own admin and all of that. What is unfamiliar, Thabang, is that there is such a desire for therapy, and people can actually afford it privately.
They can actually afford it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they can actually afford it. So I have a waiting list still. I've never been without a waiting list since I got here.
Wow.
I was fully booked within 2 weeks of arriving in Ireland.
Wow. And
and
it must also
everybody.
be, yeah, it must
It's
also be
everybody.
curious, like this South African, isn't there like an exotic thing about the clients that comes? You're the South African therapist. I want like the dynamic.
It is quite interesting. Irish people prefer me. That when I went on maternity leave, they said, "Can you refer me to a South African therapist? I don't want to see some Irish person who thinks they know me." But what is interesting is there's a variety of nationalities. Like I was always proud of South Africa for being so diverse. Ireland is diverse in the sense that they have so many foreign nationals. That the ratio of Irish clients I have to non-Irish it's almost probably 10-1 again. Yeah.
And how come is that? Is there a lot of people coming to Ireland, and how come is that?
There's a lot of foreigners who come here to find work, to find asylum, to find better living experiences. And there's a lot of job opportunities here. That's why we came. Not for me. There was a lot of work in South Africa, but primarily for my husband. So there's a lot of people here working. The island's a very small country.
Yeah, how small? Like, give me an example. Like, when you say small, what do you?
I say probably in terms of population, the size of Joburg and Pretoria.
Wow.
And in terms of size, I can drive to the other side of Ireland in 4 hours.
Wow.
By all three ways.
That's amazing. But we don't know those things. We think it's just, but otherwise, you being there, how do you feel about the preparation? So from the kind of cases you were seeing in South Africa and what you're seeing there, are they similar, or are people struggling with different things, or are people like just people everywhere across the globe?
Oh, it's a yes and no. So people are people everywhere across the globe. Depression is depression. Social anxiety is the same. We go through, those developmental stages of forming identities, forming relationships. We have all these crises along the way. But one thing that's quite different is far less violent trauma, which I'm grateful for. But there's still a lot of childhood trauma, which I didn't expect. I kind of thought that was unique to South Africa, that sort of parental neglect, that poverty. But because I see so many different nationalities, I see a lot of poverty from all other European and African countries. I see a lot of Africans, Nigerians, people from, even as close as Botswana. So, and that childhood trauma, or that childhood neglect, that's a human condition, it seems.
So it's a big thing. Is it because the parents would have, struggled themselves, or is it because, trauma is in neglect, child abuse, that kind of, or more neglect, as opposed to like what kind of childhood stuff?
So I would say
the typical experience, emotionally.
I would say emotional neglect quite a lot, not so much the physical and maybe economic neglect.
I've
been reading up a bit about a new term here. You'd be surprised, Thabang. quite a fresh term here, is intergenerational trauma.
Yeah, no, I see it. Yes, it's a big thing now. Say a little bit more about that. I hear that intergenerational trauma. What are you picking up?
I sort of laugh because I think that's South Africa. We always see that, but it's different. They have a different history. Ireland has, and it's hard for me because I don't know Ireland's history, but sort of the famine. I'm still reading up a lot about the history, but because I see so many foreign nationals, it's also I'm learning a lot about the history of China, the history of people from Brazil. There's an interesting dynamic between, British people and Irish people and their long, very traumatic history. And that's the thing, it's not trauma like South African trauma. I know that sounds so interesting.
It's a different kind. Yeah, it's a different kind of trauma.
Trauma in South Africa, there's a violence, there's a fear, there's you're always watching your back. I've never felt so relaxed in my life living here. And, I can see that their sort of trauma is different. It's almost like a neglectful trauma, where you'd be surprised how many parents say, I love you, or hug their children. People don't hug hello. And South Africa, we express our emotions so much. I miss that. Yeah, there's a very stale form of emotional expression. So I spend a lot of therapy speaking about emotional expression, finding words, mentalizing your state of being. People just say, I'm grand. I'm grand. And they literally don't have the words to go any further. Where South Africans, we get, I don't know, because we're tired. We've been exhausted from all the economic and political trauma. And if you give a South African some time, they can say, oh, or, I'm just going through the most. I've learned this interesting word during my PhD called Mguwe. I think it's a Zulu or Xhosa word that means I'm going through the most.
Yeah, when you are going, we are goisha.
So it's like we know how to express ourselves. Whereas here I'm sort of having to teach them words like, you seem very frustrated. And then they go, I don't know, I suppose so. And I'm like, well, explaining what frustration is. And giving them the right to express themselves, which I think is fun.
Summoned by greater and lesser pleasures, a man decides daily between dirt and treasure. The vigilant ones only stand to fall, but brave are they that meet the core fight. Persistently superior and lesser loves whisper, but safe are they that recognize danger. Victorious is the man who learns to master fire, so learn, dear sir, learn to stand for truth in fire.
Which makes sense, because part of when people talk about South Africa, one of the things that people say is the people are so friendly, warm, expressive. And so when you say that, that makes sense why that would be a thing that would take people aback, but you're so open and warm and all that. And so, but what then? It makes me think, what curiosities, do you start developing? What do you start wondering about? Do you start thinking about world history or things that you find yourself thinking about since doing work there?
So definitely world history, but also, and this goes back to how unregulated, I shouldn't keep saying how unregulated, but how different psychology is here. So psychology itself is very underplayed here, but what is big here is psychotherapy. So people do specific purist degrees like psychoanalytic subjectivity, or they'll do a whole 4-year degree in cognitive behavioral psychotherapy. So there's a lot more awareness of modalities, treatment plans, what is autism spectrum disorder, what are the symptoms. So I've actually learned a lot more about being a purist and having to clients want a purist approach, but they don't really understand what it is. They have a knowledge in their minds, but they don't actually have an awareness of, cognitions, of behaviors. But they'll have heard of cognitive behavioral psychotherapists and that they're so good with depression, and I feel depressed, so I must see a cognitive behavioral therapist. So I've been looking at sort of the understandings of, they're a highly intellectual bunch. Yeah. But there's a disconnect with that emotional openness.
Makes sense. Yeah.
How the history has dictated that. You know, Ireland is a very religious country, but not a very religious country. They legalized, you know, termination of pregnancy. They only just recently legalized divorce. And still you have to be separated for at least 2 to 5 years before you're allowed to get divorced. Yet you can have, they're very open about non-binary and gay pride. So it's interesting, like everyone's so far ahead of, you know, don't tell me how to dress, don't tell me how to be. But at the same time, so much of their institutions and the way that they think is so behind, if that makes sense. And yeah, so I'm reading a lot about that disconnect between being and thinking. How they think is very intellectual and they think ahead. They're very ahead in their thinking, but then in their practicality, it's just, it feels quite, I want to say old age or religion, but
so traditional in a sense.
Traditional, that's the right word I'm looking for. Traditional. Sorry, my post-pregnancy brain is still very, very.
Yes, and how is, now that you bring up the pregnancy, but how is it as a mom now? I mean, do you have other children, or is this your first?
No, my first.
Now, as a mom and then being a therapist, do you start thinking differently about parenting? About just human development and having your own, yeah?
I could talk about that for ages, yes. It's quite a scary thing to know. I mean, I'm sure you know yourself. We know what to do. We know what we would say to a client. Do we say it to ourselves? Not always. We know exactly what to do when a couple has a conflict. In our own marriages, you know, we slip up, we're human. So yeah, you can see the development in but it's a whole different ballgame when it's you as a parent, you with a child, your child. And then obviously being a therapist and going back to work soon, I feel like a completely different person. Motherhood definitely changes you.
I can relate. I mean, when the toughest time for me as a parent, I think there's one day when I had to go drop off my daughter at a crash. I think I'd never prayed a more honest prayer in my life, because for the first time, it's like I'm taking my precious and I'm leaving my precious with some stranger in a sense. And that was an emotional drive. You know, I was driving away. My heart was like, go back and get the. And it does make me think a lot about parenting. Hence the question as well.
Yeah.
And just moving about, food, places. You said you don't have to watch your back as much. You feel so relaxed. But what other things jumped at you that are not so obvious, or things you didn't expect whilst being there?
In terms of just being a human being in Ireland or being a psychologist in Ireland?
I'm asking now as being a human being, like, had you traveled a bit to Ireland? And
I traveled once before, but living here, you become more and more relaxed. In terms of, I can take public transport, and it doesn't bother me. We don't have a car here. We don't need one. The constant electricity is definitely a good thing. Especially when family comes over, they're just so relieved that they don't have to plan dinners at certain times.
No chatting, like Master Chef. So you cook with the timer.
Yes, yeah.
And
I think things like, it sounds so strange, but you don't know how to read people as easily.
Yeah.
But that comes on a lot quicker than you think. This might be quite a controversial thing to say, but in South Africa, you could, but you shouldn't. But people make easy judgments. If you see someone on the street and they're of a certain color, or if they're coming from a certain side of the street, like or side of Joburg city center, you would know who they are. Here it's a bit different because what they call council houses. The council houses are integrated with the upper class. So you literally have an upper class house and council houses. And they all look the same.
I see.
For one, they're all white, or they're all European, so Brazilian, but you can't easily tell. In the beginning, I couldn't tell. I was honestly just scared of everybody. I held my handbag very close. Now I can sort of pick up the slang, so it's in the language. If I can hear a certain language, I know you live in a council house. You're likely dealing drugs on the side. They have a huge drug problem here, I have to say. They might not have violent crime, but they have a lot of drugs. So you can sort of pick up, okay, that person is likely either going to ask me for money, or is going to turn around and snort something. Where someone who's dressed exactly the same and looks exactly the same, just in the way that they speak, I can tell, okay, that's likely as someone who's going to come to therapy or someone who I'm going to see in a restaurant. So that distinction was quite hard to manage. And then every time I see a Black person, I instantly think they're South African, and they're usually British, and it's very disappointing.
Yeah, but this is so interesting. I mean, maybe finally, like, let's say somebody is thinking of following you, what would you advise? What would you say about, okay, before you come, think about this?
Think about if you've done enough in South Africa. I know that sounds really strange, but the only reason I think I could come is because I gave 10 years post my degree in South Africa. Because the guilt you feel when you come to another country, you realize we treat our employees like trash. We honestly, it's institutionalized slavery. Domestic workers, or we try zhuzh up by saying they're house executives, but the way that people are treated in South Africa is terrible. And you feel so guilty that you are not living a really good life. Because it is. You live well here. You still struggle. I mean, there's still, like I say, human condition is the same. There are still people who want to hurt you, and there are still parents who neglect their kids, and, there are still bad bosses. But in terms of the economy and your living situation, you are under so much stress in South Africa. You don't even realize that. I think South Africans are so desensitized to load shedding, to potholes. And if you haven't given enough to the country that raised you, because to be raised in South Africa is a privilege. That's one thing I will always say, is I'm very proud to be South African. I'm very proud for the education I got, the diversity that was instilled in me, the respect, the openness. And if you haven't given back enough, don't think of coming over yet, because I still feel guilty, and I have to remind myself I gave a lot after I was qualified. And I still do. I'm finishing my PhD in South Africa. I hope to publish more in South Africa. I still share a lot of mental health news to my South African students that I had. I'm still very connected with people. When you leave South Africa, don't ever leave for good in your mind. Like, I think what we gain growing up in South Africa is so valuable. Like I say, I have a long waiting list. You are very valuable in this country. And they also love South Africans just because we are so hardworking. We're so open, we're so kind, we're so hardworking. We give a lot of ourselves. My husband's been told to leave work on time because they don't want him to overwork. They say, go home, go be with your family. That would never happen at home.
No. No, that's wonderful. And I think maybe it's a beautiful place to pause it. But thank you for taking the time. I mean, it's enriching to hear, and all the best with the adventures. Right. So I hope you document a lot, and we'll get to see with time, the interesting things you've seen, done and heard, we look forward to see what you're doing there.
And, I want to reach out. If anybody wants to come to South Africa, just hit me a message. I've been helping quite a few people who wanted to move over. Because it's hard to come to a country that's not as regulated. You really are on your own.
Great stuff. No, thank you very much.
And good to see you, Thabang. Always good to see you.
Yes, yes, it's a while, but this is great actually. Yeah. Cool.
Thanks, Ron.